The border crisis is something that is capturing a lot of attention around the country. Many people are either in one of two camps. One, hey, we're doing everything we can. This is not that big of a problem. The other side is, yeah, see, we told you so. There's this huge throng of people who are making their way up onto the southern United States, causing a crisis. And new imagery came out today, a lot of new pictures, some from a Democratic congressperson. We're going to show you, talk about that. We've also got Project Veritas release some new information about some images and photographs that they covered. And so we've got a lot to talk about. So let's start with a little bit of background on this. So, this has been percolating for a long time. Now, immigration has not really been in the forefront of the country's mind for a long period of time, largely because it's been kind of quiet. I mean, this was a big part of Donald Trump's 2016 campaign, where he said that, we got to fix the southern border. He was beating the drum on building a wall. Some of that got done. Some of it didn't get done. And it was kind of something that was a non-issue. I mean, we were talking about a lot of other things. And then coronavirus really captured the fourth year of his presidency. And so now it feels like, to me at least, that this whole thing kind of bubbled up out of nowhere. We saw this big spontaneous surge start right around the same time that Joe Biden took office. And then on Inauguration Day, my understanding is he signed 5 different executive orders, and we started to see some major policy changes trickle down from the new administration down into Border Patrol, down into the Department of Homeland Security, and now it's turning into a problem. So let's get a little bit of background on this over from the Washington Post. And the Washington Post is not a right-wing, alt-right, crazy conservative Republican organization, which is why I wanted to go to them. I think that traditionally they tend to skew very, very left, in my opinion, and I've sort of been critical of them on this channel, using them as a news source. They do good reporting, but it's not anything that is far right to the point where I think that it is not credible. So let's jump into the background on this story. It says, no end in sight inside the Biden administration's failure to contain the border surge. This was posted 2 days ago on Saturday, March 20th at 1:24 p.m., written by Ashley Parker, Nick Miroff, and Sean Sullivan. It says, shortly before Christmas last year, Susan Rice and Jake Sullivan, 2 top advisors to Biden, sat for an interview with a Spanish wire service to issue a stark warning to migrants considering journeying north to the nation's southern border. Don't come now, but help is on the way. The next day, Biden was similarly pointed, saying his administration, while eager to roll back Donald Trump's immigration policies, first needed to implement guardrails to avoid winding up with 2 million people on our border. So they were eager to roll them back, but they needed to implement these guardrails. So what does that mean? What are guardrails? Because they don't want 2 million people on our southern border. Well, less than a month later, President Biden began tearing down some of the guardrails himself. And let's timeline this, right? Shortly before Christmas last year, Joe Biden was the president-elect. Now, there was a lot of election litigation. We talked a lot about that here, but the election was over. And so they're talking about transition, President-elect Joe Biden. So they're talking about it in Christmas. Then, less than a month later, he began tearing down some of the guardrails himself. He issued 5 immigration executive orders on Inauguration Day. So that's not much time to build up the guardrails. And he promised an immigration policy far more humane and welcoming. Well, we've got a lot of people who want to be welcomed into the country now. His administration also began allowing unaccompanied minors into the country, a marked departure from the Trump administration's approach. So you start to see this, some changes happen, some consequences follow. Now the Biden administration is scrambling to control the biggest surge in 20 years, with the nation on pace for as many as 2 million migrants at the southern border this year. The outcome Biden said he wanted to avoid. Yeah. So, all right. So let's keep going back on this. Situation at the border, which Biden and his advisors steadfastly refused to call a crisis, is the result of an administration that has forewarned of the coming surge, yet still ill-prepared and lacking the capacity to deal with it. Officials have been plagued by muddled messaging, sometimes making appeals that seem directed more at liberal activists than the migrants they need to dissuade from coming to the country. They took several steps, including saying it would allow unaccompanied minors into the country. That increased the flow of migrants and encouraged more to try their luck. There are now more than 10,000 unaccompanied migrant children in the care of the Department of Health and Human Services, and 5,000 more in the care of Customs and Border Patrol. nearly twice the previous record, according to the latest figures obtained by the Washington Post. So double the previous record. We're talking about 15,000 unaccompanied minor children with DHS, another 5,000 with Border Patrol. 15,000 children, twice the previous record. And so what are we going to do about it? Well, the warnings came before Biden even took office. During the transition period, career officials at the Border Patrol tried to issue sober alarms to the Biden team about the likelihood of a crisis at the border that could quickly overwhelm the nation's capacity. So the Border Patrol officials delivered Zoom briefings to the Biden team that included modeling projections showing a steep increase in the arrival of the minors if Trump's policies were suddenly lifted. So plenty of warnings. They knew about it, according to one current and two former Department of Homeland Security officials. So they got the briefing and they didn't heed the warnings. Transition officials understood the risks as well, identifying a surge of unaccompanied minors and a dearth of shelter space exacerbated by the pandemic as the most pressing problems. Yet Biden immediately embarked on an aggressive strategy to roll back Trump administration policies. On his first day, suspended the border wall construction, affirmed protections for young immigrant dreamers, scrapped the travel ban from 7 majority Muslim countries, ordered a 100-day moratorium on deportations by Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and then he sent a broad immigration overhaul proposal to Congress, including an 8-year pathway to citizenship. More moves followed in rapid-fire succession. He ordered a majority increase in refugee admissions. He launched a task force to reunify families separated by Trump's zero-tolerance crackdown. While easing restrictions for minors, he also ended the Remain in Mexico program. And I want to talk about this a little bit. He ended the Remain in Mexico program that Trump had used to send asylum seekers back across the border to wait outside the U.S. territory for their cases to be decided, allowing hundreds of families crowded into squalid camps to enter the United States, producing emotional scenes and circulated widely in Spanish language media. And I have been somebody who's been curious about this problem for some period of time. And I went into a Clubhouse room recently where they were talking about immigration. And actually, we've had some immigration attorneys in our Clubhouse room. About 2 weeks ago, we had, I think, 2 immigration lawyers come in. And I asked them a pointed question. And they may be in Clubhouse right now. Maybe we'll see them after the show. But I wanted to know specifically, what is causing this sudden change? Why are suddenly people now coming to the United States? And I obviously have an opinion on the answer. I think it's because Trump was in office. He had one set of policies. Those policies are no longer there because he is no longer in office. And so people understand that. And I think in terms of incentives, how are we incentivizing or disincentivizing people to do certain things or to not do certain things? That's sort of where I live. I live in criminal law. I live in a space where our society says that really strong disincentives should do something. And oftentimes they really don't, to prohibit, or I would say to reduce, recidivism or repeat offenders. But that's aside. That's a whole tangent. I shouldn't have even brought that up. I'm going to go down a whole rabbit hole in a rant, and we don't want to do that today. So we are talking about incentives for what is causing people to come to the southern border. And I was asking people specifically about this. I said, hey, what about this Remain in Mexico policy? What if that was enough to cause an incentive to encourage people to come over into the United States, because rather than waiting in Mexico, they could wait in the United States? It's a pretty simple change. We're not going to deny you asylum. You still have that right to asylum. You still have a right to sort of petition the government for some sort of relief if you are an immigrant, but you just have to wait across the border. You just have to wait in Mexico to do that. And then, of course, the concern there, the criticism is that Trump and his immigration policies also really sort of tightened up the ability for people who were waiting to get access into the country, but it was still waiting in Mexico. You did not get to cross the border and then set up shop in the United States and wait here while your case was pending. And so in my mind, that created a very strong incentive for people to come across the border. And you can have some arguments about that one way or the other, but I'd be curious to see what people have to say about that. What is causing this? Because a lot of the response that I would hear from these other immigration attorneys in Clubhouse and elsewhere is that Biden and his people did not tell them to come. In fact, they've been saying for a long time, don't come. Don't come to the United States. Kind of, right? But they're kind of talking out of both sides of their mouths. Like, we need to be more humane. That's not who we are. Remember that? A lot of hyperventilators out there saying, hey, That's not who we are. We're Americans. That's just not us. That's not in our spirit. That's not in our heart. That's not who we are. And then now we're starting to see this massive problem of ballooning. So they're doing the same thing that they said that that's not who we are. And now they're having to deal with this massive crisis. They don't have enough physical space to put the bodies from all the people that they are incentivizing to come across the border. So how are we identifying what is causing this change? Let's see if we can break that down a little bit. Department of Homeland Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas acknowledged last week that the Biden administration is on pace to encounter more individuals on the southwest border than we have in the last 20 years. The latest CPB enforcement data shows agents made nearly 100,000 arrests and detentions so far in March. March is not even over yet. On pace to be the highest one-month total since 2006. On March 10th, the busiest day yet, they took more than 6,200 people into custody. So 6,200 people on one day. That's a lot of people. That is a ton of people to take into custody. Wow. All right. So here we have on Thursday, Biden administration and Mexico reached an agreement. The United States would supply Mexico with doses of the vaccine for coronavirus. Mexico then pledged the United States would help contain the migration surge, including taking back more Central Americans' families expelled under the health order. Mexican authorities announced the closure of the country's southern border to non-essential travel. The deal with Mexico is among the first steps the administration has taken aimed at slowing the crossings. Most of its other measures have sought to add capacity for unaccompanied minors and to accelerate the release of certain groups. Homeland Security officials are considering flying migrants to states near the Canadian border for processing, according to two DHS officials and an email reviewed by the Post. Solving the nation's crisis will take time addressing the root cause. Two goals that it right now is to getting the children out of the Border Patrol care and placing them with vetted family members and sponsors in the United States. More than 500 teen and children are arriving each day without parents at nearly 3 times the rate they are being released. 500 teens and children every day. Several administration officials have argued that immigration surges are cyclical. The current one would probably have occurred regardless of who is president. Yeah, right. Yeah, several administrations have argued that. Yeah. This administration has, right? Nobody from Trump's administration is saying that, because we all know why this is happening. Now, what is the White House saying about this? In her White House press briefing on Thursday last week, answering a question on immigration, Psaki seemed to slip up, referring to, quote, the crisis on the border. Pressed later on her word choice, Psaki corrected herself, saying, quote, challenges on the border, and replied that her earlier misstatement did not reflect any change in the administration's thinking about the border surge. Misstep underscores the administration's struggle to send a coherent message on the border, despite repeatedly saying that now is not the time for asylum seekers to come. They're still losing the messaging war. Smugglers, as well as relatives of the migrants already in the United States, often argue that Biden and his more lenient policies mean making the journey is now worth the risk. And so that's obviously how this works, right? It's about the incentives. A lot of people that I've been speaking to, they just say, well, Joe Biden said, don't come, He said they shouldn't cross those borders. Don't come. It's like, guys, okay, that's great. Do you think that everybody who wanted to come to the United States listened to Gospel Joe and just said, all right, good call. You're right, Joe. Going to wait until you give me the okay there, Uncle Joe. Thank you for that. No, that's not how this works. The policies are what works. So people are going to continue to come until the incentives are removed and eliminated. Now, you can have a disagreement about that, whether you think that's the right thing to do, whether you think that's humanitarian to remove some of the barriers to entry. You can say that that's a humanitarian thing to do. And you can say that anybody out there who wants to have, let's say, legal, safe, controlled immigration, if you can call them bigots and xenophobes all you want, that's also fine. It doesn't bother me at all if you want to call me that. But I think that having a policy that allows us to reach our goals is important. And this policy is not doing that at all. Right now we have, let's say this. Nobody wants kids in cages. Nobody wants people to be rushing the border and not be housed and not receive the basic humanitarian ends, goals, and needs. Nobody wants people sleeping on floors, covered up in space blankets. That's not okay, right? We don't want that. But we also don't want an uncontrolled, unmanageable rush of approximately 2 million people on the southern border. 6,200 in one day. 100,000 in 1 month. That's 2 million people very quickly. And you can have a lot of policy disagreements on that. You can say you're a libertarian and hey, it's the free flow of labor. If people want to come across the borders, open borders, this is just capitalism in action. If there was no economic need for these people here, then they wouldn't come. You can have that argument. Or you can have the moral superiority argument. These are children. How could you do this to children? All right, you can take that argument too. But the point is, we got to be talking about this, I think, candidly. We need to have real conversations about it. Right now, it sounds like the Biden administration is just not wanting to acknowledge it. And when they do acknowledge it, they say, well, this is cyclical, or they blame Donald Trump, as we're about to see. Well, it's the prior administration that was really responsible for this stuff. But new photos are out now, and so now everybody is up in arms about it, and rightfully so, because it's a massive double standard. I was not somebody here who was hyperventilating over the kids in cages BS when Donald Trump was doing it. I'm not going to do it here either. I'm not going to sit here and go, this is outrageous. I don't think that people coming across the border should be set up in the Four Seasons. There should be some disincentives for this stuff. When they come across the border, if the government is going to set up the incentives to encourage them to cross that border and to be here, well, then they got to deal with that, right? The Biden administration, if they're saying that we're going to modify these policies and that causes a bunch of people to come across the borders, well, then they got to deal with it. That's their responsibility because they've opened themselves up to that burden. They've said, we're going to make these adjustments. It's being communicated across the world. People are hearing it. They're making a rush to the border. Now the Biden administration, they have no idea what to do with it, which is what we're going to see with these photos. Kids in cages. This came over from hotair.com. Ed Morrissey did some of the heavy lifting on this. It's a good blog if you want to check it out. Photos leak of Biden's border crisis holding pods. So these aren't cages anymore. These are pods for children. Want to see what the Biden administration has kept hidden from the public in the border crisis? Give House Democrat Henry Cuellar some thanks for this leak over to Axios, which published pictures of the pods in which children were being warehoused. These look suspiciously like kids in cages photos used to slam Trump administration right up to their 2014 provenance became widely known. It looks like the only change between Biden and Obama is replacing chain link for plastic, stuffing more kids than ever into these cages. And this came over from Steph Knight over at Axios.com. It says here, exclusive photos from inside a Border Patrol temporary overflow facility taken over the weekend in Donna, Texas, reveal a crowded makeshift conditions at the border as the government's longer-term child shelters and family detention centers fill up. This is the scoop over from Axios. Next up, we've got the pictures. It says exclusive photos from inside the area where there's a temporary overflow facility in Donna, Texas. Crowded makeshift conditions. Each of the 8 pods in the so-called soft-sided facility has a 260-person occupancy, said Representative Henry Cuellar from Texas. He's a Democrat, by the way. He provided photos to Axios to raise awareness about the situation, but on Sunday, he said one pod held more than 400 unaccompanied male minors. 400 kids. Because the Biden administration has restricted media coverage at the housing facilities, why would they do that? If they're a very transparent and accountable administration, well, then why the hell are they restricting the media from going and taking these pictures? Images like these offer a rare window into the conditions. Cuellar, who recently visited a shelter for children, did not tour the Donna facility or take the photos himself. He says they were taken over the weekend. Cuellar described the setting as, quote, terrible conditions for the children, said they need to be moved more rapidly into the care of the Department of Health and Human Services. This is what it looks like. Right? See a lot of people. Now, some of them have masks on, all lying around. Of course, this is not a cage because this is plastic. If this were some other material other than plastic, then that would be a cage. And Joe Biden and his administration would really be like the Third Reich. I mean, if you want to get down to it, but they're not. This is not Third Reich behavior. This is just very humanitarian. As you can see here, some people have their little space blankets, which is very nice. And they are now behind plastic, which is much more humane. I mean, I feel better about this. I'm not even upset about it, really. Here's another one where there's some more kids not in cages. This is just a facility. This is a pod, as we can see. Number of doors, Border Patrol agent over here. We've got a lot of people with masks on, a lot of children. Most of their images are, of course, all blanked out and protected. But certainly not a cage. Very humanitarian. Looks like we have like a guard tower up here, which sort of like something that you might see in like a jail or a prison or something like that. They have these towers where people or officers are sort of high up on there, but this is not even remotely close to kids in cages because this is plastic, and everything is also white in here. You see how nice and sort of painted white this is, which is a very cheery color, kind of looks clean and open, and so that's nice. It looks refreshing. So there you go. So there's some more images. Here's another one. A lot of other kids sort of in non-cages. I kind of want to call these plastic cages, but they're just not. Let's call them plastic rooms. Plastic pods, I guess, is the word they're using. We can go with that word. So it looks like they're watching some TV there on a nice, 27-inch TV for 400 people. So that's good. We got some saran wrapped mattresses, just a couple of them. Not everybody has one, looks like, and everybody's just wrapped up in space blankets. So there's some more images coming out. Now this is from Joe Biden's people here. This is from his administration. So this is okay. This is not that big of a deal. Here is another one. As you can see, some people just sort of laying around there. Somebody had some animal crackers, looks like, down there, and definitely not cages, more plastic. So it's just like, some saran wrap. I mean, that's really all this is. Not even a big deal. So those are the new images that are floating around the internet. Those came out from a Texas Democratic representative. And if you recall, I'm not going to go back into the timeline, into the time capsule here, but do you remember those images of AOC standing outside, hanging on the chain link fence, crying because of what she saw on the inside, or just, taking pictures for her Instagram? It was one of the two. I can't tell which one it was. But the question is, what are these people saying about this? A lot of news about kids in cages during the early administration, Trump administration. Now, kind of looks exactly the same. It's actually significantly worse because it's the highest that it's been in the last 20 years. Double the last record. So it's significantly worse. But I'm not hearing as much hyperventilating today. Just a little bit. Just some of these stories. Here it is from Andrew Meehan. It says, important to note that the Donna facility is in many ways the best facility along the southern border. The overcrowding seen here is a result of a lack of capacity to move children to more appropriate, longer-term settings. So this is the best image. It's the best facility that we got. The other ones are way worse. And since Joe Biden and his media people are not allowing any other reporters or journalists into any of these facilities, we can't really see what's going on in there. Transparent and accountable, though. Here is James O'Keefe, as usual, going out there and releasing never-before-seen images from Donna, Texas. It's an immigrant detention center. It says thousands of illegal immigrants packed into tight spaces and wrapped in a space blanket on the floor. Insider says 50 plus are COVID positive. Hashtag Biden border crisis, which was trending today. So we've got that video. And this is another very interesting point. A lot of people typically, I would say on the left side of the aisle, they are very, very hysterical about COVID. They've been for a long time. We see this massive lockdowns in all of the left-leaning states in this country. And I wonder if they're as concerned about COVID for the undocumented immigrants. Well, what are we going to do with, we've got no space. We've got a ton of COVID. We've got no capacity to process these people through their justice requests. At least they got enough space blankets, though. That's good. Here is James O'Keefe.
Project Veritas has obtained never-before-seen photographs of what it actually looks like inside this facility. Shocking images showing people wrapped up in what looks like metal foil, laying on the ground, their faces covered. Why won't the administration be honest about this? Why won't they show you these images? I'm on the ground in Donna, Texas. If you want to take a look at this facility right here, just a month ago, Customs and Border Patrol agents completed the construction of that facility. It's a 165,000 square foot facility, and we have never seen images inside this facility before. They won't even allow the non-profit lawyers who conduct the actual oversight of these immigration detention centers to go inside. We have a man who's telling us to leave. Where would the press?
Oh man, you gotta get off. It's private property.
They told us it's private property, but you know what isn't private property? Airspace. We're gonna fly this Cirrus right over the top of the detention center to get a better look. There's the facility right there. You can see it. There it is. Flying over the facility to give you a good vantage point. During a recent press conference, the press secretary was asked a question why they haven't released these images.
Even you all haven't released any images that you obviously could redact if you wanted to. again, we remain committed to sharing with all of you the treatment.
She dodged the question, saying, quote,
And we remain committed to transparency. I don't have an update for you on the
timeline, end quote. Well, Press Secretary of the White House, let Project Veritas do your job for you. Just last night, we have now obtained these photos inside this facility. Now, these photos are very, very grim. Project Veritas has also learned these photographs were taken in the last few days. There are 8 pods with 8 cells in each facility. At any given moment, there are an average of 3,000 people in custody inside this detention center. The pod has 8 cells that are currently holding 600, that's 600 unaccompanied juvenile males aged 7 to 17. They're separated by age or physical size depending on the room. 50 of the individuals inside this facility were COVID positive. There have been multiple sexual assaults, normal assaults, and daily medical emergencies.
Yeah, these things are so frustrating from a policy perspective. You know, on it's stuff like this is so obvious, in my opinion. There are a lot of different types of policy issues that we deal with in the world where it's just not that clear as to what we should do about it. Like with coronavirus, for example, you know, this thing popped up. Nobody knew what to do. Everybody was scrambling to try to find answers. And it was a natural, organic thing that just popped up and nobody knew what to do about it. We were all trying our very best. But this is something that we can control. I mean, literally, you can have one president go from one president to another president, change a couple policies. Suddenly, there's a crisis that was manufactured as a result of the policy changes. And so the real question is why? Why does this stuff happen? And why are we not talking about the cause of what happened? We're talking about this, you know, sort of after the fact. Well, what are we going to do with these kids? What are we going to do with the, you know, the conditions are terrible. But maybe it's the policy. Maybe we should change the policy because this wasn't happening 3 months ago. 4 months ago now. So, all right. Here is the Department of Homeland Security. This guy, he goes by the name of Mayorkas. He tells Chuck Todd, quote, "The border is closed." Yeah, right. It's too late for that. Says, "We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults. And we have made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children." So it sounds like then that they are they separating kids from their parents or what? Are the kids just coming over on their own? Let's listen in on him. He goes on Meet the Press and he gives a bunch of non-answers. He's got 2 minutes here to give an answer. You're going to hear whoever this interviewer is. I think it's Chuck Todd, something like that. He goes out there and he says, well, okay, respectfully, how about you answer this question? We go back over to the Department of Homeland Security guy and he says, well, we've got 3 solutions. In fact, oh, you want a solution? I got 3 of them. Long term, middle term, short term. Then he doesn't explain any of those things. Doesn't tell us what any of that stuff is. So he gives us no answer. Here he is.
Are you concerned that a market efficiency has been created where folks have decided, look, my kid's got a shot at getting in the United States if I don't go with them?
Incentives.
Chuck, our message has been straightforward and simple, and it's true. The border is closed. We are expelling families. We are expelling single adults, and we've made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children. I think we are executing on our plans, and quite frankly, when we are finished doing so, the American public will look back on this and say we secured our border and we upheld our values and our principles as a nation.
How can you say the border is closed if there is this, what some would look at as a loophole? And I understand on humanitarian grounds, but if the goal is to get these asylum seekers to seek the asylum in home country, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, for instance, how do you get them to do that if our policy is to let them in at the border?
Good question. Good question.
So, Chuck, we have a short-term plan, a medium-term plan, and a long-term plan, and the President and I have spoken to this repeatedly. Please remember something, that President Trump dismantled the orderly, humane, and efficient way of allowing children to make their claims under United States law in their home countries. He dismantled the Central American Minors Program. So we are rebuilding those orderly and safe processes as quickly as possible. But in the meantime, we will not expel into the Mexican desert, for example,
Here it comes.
3 orphan children whom I saw over the last 2 weeks. We just won't do that.
Why?
That's not who we are.
There it is. That's not who we are. What a joke of an interview that was. Absolutely non-answers across the board. The interviewer says, can you just answer? It sounds like you said the border's closed, but your policies are really encouraging people because they know that they have this loophole. They have an exit strategy. As long as they can get to your shore, then they're good. They're in the clear because your own policy idiots say that they are allowed into the country and they're not going to adjust that. He asks him, what's your plan? He goes, we got a long-term plan, a medium-term plan, and a short-term plan. Then goes on to not answer about or explain about anything about any one of those plans, just defaults right back to Donald Trump and says he wrecked the immigration system. It's his fault that we can't process these people because he unrolled all of these plans. Well, that might be true. He may have done that. I won't even argue with that. Let's say he did roll those plans back. Well, you knew that as the Biden administration before you came in and eliminated the guardrails that Joe Biden himself had said that he did not want to avoid pulling off of the train tracks because this whole thing is going to go off the rails quickly. He said, Joe Biden said, we don't want 2 million people showing up at the southern border. Now, according to estimates, there's 2 million people showing up at the southern border. We got Department of Homeland Security, non-answer person, just a typical politician who comes out there and just recites rote talking points like an automaton robot. Answers nothing for us. We got no insight from that other than he wants to blame Trump's administration for this thing when there weren't 2 million people surging the southern border during the Trump administration. So none of that stuff was necessary because there wasn't a surge because of his policies. So when they get asked about their policies, he says, we've got 3 plans, but then doesn't detail any of the plans and just says, well, it's all Trump's fault. So here is, and I've heard this too. I've heard a lot of criticism here saying that it is not Biden's fault. It's not his administration's fault. These are just people who just decided that we're going to come. It's March now. It's kind of nice out here in Arizona. In July, it's going to be 140 million degrees here. So nobody likes that. So they're all coming across right now. That's it. It's just a spontaneous thing. It's a bunch of people who just decided to migrate today. After 4 years, well, now's a good time. Yeah, March 2021, coronavirus is sort of on the way out. Maybe we'll just get the kids together, get your mom, honey, get your wife, get your wife, sweetie, get everybody, come up, bring them all in here. And we're going to go make a trek across the border. Or some pretty strong incentives were created by the new administration. Could it be that? Let's ask. Here is a Twitter post over from Steve Guest says, ABC's Martha Raddatz to illegal alien who crossed the border. And you can use that term if you want. You can call it pejorative. I don't particularly care. Would you have tried to do this when Donald Trump was president? Martha Raddatz asks. Illegal alien says, definitely not. Did you come here because Joe Biden was elected president? He says, basically. All right, so there you go. And don't take my word for it. Here is the video of this. And this is so obvious. It's like it's not even funny. It is actually pretty funny, but it's kind of ridiculous that this is so shocking to people. Obviously, this is the answer. Here is a clip from that interview.
This significant surge coming after President Biden ended Donald Trump's so-called Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to wait there for their court proceedings. Since then, many of those tent cities along the Mexican border have emptied out as people start streaming in. We were there when a bus of 56 asylum seekers arrived at Casa Alitas, a Catholic charity shelter in Tucson. Men, pregnant women, and children stepping off the bus with only what they could carry. This father, who asked that we not show his face, traveled to Mexico from Brazil with his wife and 3 young kids before crossing the border. Would you have tried to do this when Donald Trump was president?
Definitely not. Definitely. We had the chance, the same violence that is going on today was there last year. We used to watch the news, and I definitely won't do this.
So did you come here because Joe Biden was elected president?
Basically. The main thing was the violence in my country. And the second thing, I think, was Joe Biden.
Yeah, so he goes through, he says, the main thing in my country was the violence. The second thing is Joe Biden, right? He says, I don't know if you could hear that. Of course, they didn't show his face, but he said specifically, would you have come here if Donald Trump was still president? And he goes, no, absolutely not. No way. Not even close. He said, there was still violence in my country a year ago, but we watched the news and we didn't come. Now that Joe Biden is president, now we have a chance. This guy came all the way up from Brazil and he's making a move. Look, when I am sort of critical about immigration, it has nothing to do with the fact that I don't want good people here in this country. I want people who are hurting, who want to be a part of the American dream to come and be a part of this country. I want that. I want a good country here, and that is a country of immigrants, and I think it's a beautiful thing, but it needs to be done legally, and we need to do it in a way where our government is not acting in a boneheaded manner that is causing a lot of unnecessary suffering. These people are suffering because our incompetent government created very perverse incentives. They were basically coming out with a bunch of policies that was going to appease all of the woke people that exist in this country, all of the people who just look at themselves every morning in the mirror and say, that's not who we are in this country. They wake up every day. Department of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, goes in front of his mirror and he just practices that. We're Americans. That's not who we are. All right. Good for you, man. Good for you. Go out there, pass a bunch of policies that make you feel better about yourself, that give you this claim to massive moral superiority about what a good person you are in this country, and make everybody feel good because you rolled back the evil Trump administration's policies, even though that they were working, even though we didn't see a surge of 2 million people banging up against the southern border of the United States. You can feel better about that. But you got to deal with the consequences, and you are responsible. You broke the jar. You got to fix it. If you go into the shop and you break something, you own it. You got to pay for that. And that's exactly what Joe Biden did. Now, there's a huge just surge of individuals, people, children, women, men, everybody in between coming across the border. They're all suffering unnecessarily. Whose fault is that? It's Joe Biden's fault, and it's his administration's fault, because everything was, you might have disagreed with it on a humanitarian level, and you could say that the immigration system in this country is massively broken. I wouldn't even fight you on that. But it's about this. It's about what is taking place at the southern border and who caused it. What are the policies that led to these consequences? They all came from Joe Biden. And it's not even hard to pin it on him. Here is a prime example, and I can guarantee you that that person is not alone. So the rest of that Raditz show, here it is. We have somebody else. Now a lot of people on the left are saying, well, this is pretty tone deaf. This is posted over from RNC Research. Says ABC on Biden's border crisis. To do that 180 without really any preparation, he owns this. He's tone deaf and doesn't have a plan. You're not kidding me. This is from ABC.
Gangsterism, corruption. The pressure is tremendous, and to do that 180 without really any preparation, he owns this now. He owns it.
And Laura, he really does. And should they have been more aware? I mean, they really seem tone deaf to the politics of this as well. You heard Mayorkas trying to do cleanup, I think, there, trying to send this strong message. But is it too late?
Well, that's why you see, Martha, so many of the administration officials, including Mayorkas, as well as Roberta Jacobson, the Southern Border Coordinator for the White House, they're starting to change their tune. They're starting to say, we're not just saying don't come, we're saying don't come like this ever and come in the legal fashion. But again, there's such a big influx. And I was just talking to local advocates here in El Paso yesterday, and they were saying that they feel as though beyond the rollback of the Remain in Mexico, which they felt as though went well, according to the advocates and activists. Beyond that, they feel as though the White House doesn't have a plan in terms of how to address not just the children, but also the adults and the families that are coming over here. And that when migrants are being released into South Texas or when they're being transferred here to El Paso, that there isn't enough testing, COVID testing for them, that they aren't sure where they're supposed to go. And so they really, as Matt said, they do feel like it's a not sustainable situation here.
Yeah, so nobody is happy about this. You have people who are concerned about unbridled immigration into this country. They're unhappy about it because there's a surge at the border. But you also have people who want a lot more people coming into this country, and they would welcome all of these people with open arms. They're saying this is also problematic. So this is coming from the left. This is people who said that Joe Biden was going to come in here and just really give us a sort of hopeful immigration policy that would reverse a lot of the draconian megalomaniac Donald Trump. They were going to reverse all of that. And now they're not doing such a good job. Now there's people suffering. Worse than when Donald Trump was in office. Literally, it's twice the amount of people. They have no idea what to do. Let's wrap this up. It says here, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas acknowledged last week that the Biden administration is on pace to encounter more individuals than we have in the last 20 years. 100,000 arrests. I already talked about those numbers. 6,200 in custody. Border Patrol chief wrote on Twitter last week, says no end in sight. Friday, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut joined Mayorkas and 3 other lawmakers, including Republicans, on a trip to the border. Leaving a processing facility in El Paso, Murphy tweeted that he was shaken by what he saw. Hundreds of kids packed into big open rooms, he wrote. In a corner, I fought back tears as a 13-year-old girl sobbed uncontrollably, explaining through a translator how terrified she was, having been separated from her grandmother and without her parents. Right? So this is what Joe Biden gets. This is what his administration gets. It's obvious to me. When you create a bunch of incentives to encourage people to do something, they're going to do those things. They're doing it. And so he wrecked it. Now he's got to fix it. He owns the whole thing. Very sad. Very sad. I'm not encouraging. I don't endorse treating people poorly ever. Very sad. Of our own making, which is why this is so stupid, why it's so embarrassing that this is going on in this country. It's obvious. But they're responding not to reality. They're responding to what feels good. They're going to roll all this stuff back. Well, it's going to cause a problem. You guys are going to have to deal with it so they can clean it up. All right, so let's take some questions over here from locals.com. My slide is not updating. I apologize. I missed some questions in that first segment because my slides were not updating. And so I'm going to see if I can get this open now and get some of the questions. And for some reason, it's just not working. So we're not doing questions today, apparently, because my slides aren't working. So we're just going to save those questions for tomorrow. Ask your questions if you want to. And let's move on to the next segment. Go to watchingthewatchers.locals.com to ask a question tomorrow.